Good morning, grade sixes. I hope you were able to enjoy the listening example that I posted before this. Aretha Franklin is just a fantastic singer with an amazing voice, and she gives you a good idea of what the soul style going around in the 70s or late 60s and going into the 80s and 90s was like. Next class, the next interactive class will have Masked Singer, including a different soul singer. So I look forward to sharing that with you. So today we're going to take a look at vocal ranges. Now, in singing or the music, any kind of music where the singing is involved, you're going to have different voice types based off of what is generally found of different ranges of people's voices. Now, oftentimes it's split into men and women or boys and girls, but it also depends on the person's physiology. So there might be men who can sing much higher than other women. There might be women who can sing much lower than some men. Now, generally, these voices only fit in one gender or the other, but we won't get into that too much and look more at kind of what they sound like. So there are 6 main voice categories with a few kind of like in-between ones where you have some outliers. The highest voice type is called a soprano, and that voice ranges from C4 to C6, and sometimes a little lower, so a little higher, so F3 to F6. So remember when I drew the staff for you on the board, there were the different letters for each note. So C4 is about here, and then C6 goes all the way up to here. So a soprano would be able to sing. So if you are able to sing that high, then you could probably be a soprano. Now the next voice type down that sings not quite as high as a soprano is called a mezzo soprano. So they found that there's this voice type that is very strong in this one little range, in this range here, who they can maybe go a little lower than a soprano, but not quite as high. And that's called a mezzo soprano. So they go from about A3, which is here, to A5, which is about here. And sometimes they go a little higher or lower, such as these notes, F3 and F6. So if you were a mezzo soprano, you could probably sing all these notes. Oh, no, I went too high. My apologies. So, yeah, there you go. So, Mr. Marr played a little bit too high that time. My apologies. So, if you have a voice kind of in that range, then you can sing those notes. Now, just to a quick reminder, or just a disclaimer, that just because you can sing from one note to the other doesn't necessarily mean you can always reach those notes. It might be kind of at the edge of your range. So some mezzo sopranos, they can probably sing this low, but it might also be just a stretch for them. So there's always a comfortable range and kind of like you're stretching your voice a little bit range. And as you get into a higher range, sometimes that is called your head voice, which is where you're kind of doing a little slightly different kind of sound in your voice. And Mr. Marr will show you an example of that later because it's more common in men than it is in women. Now, the next voice down is called an alto. Now, alto goes from about this note, an F3, up to this note, an F5. So, and then they can maybe go a little lower or a little higher. So if you are an alto, you could sing these notes. And then all the sharps and flats in between as well. Now there's a voice that we talked about with one of our singers during Black History Month. I can't remember her first name, but her last name was White. And she was a contralto, which is kind of in between the alto and the next voice type down, a tenor. Now, contralto can sing about as low as a tenor, or just maybe a little bit higher. And so their range is very similar to the tenor voice, which I'll talk about right now. So the tenor voice goes from about this note, a C3, up to this note, a C5, and sometimes they can go a little higher or a little lower, such as these notes. Now, a contralto can sing a very similar range, maybe a little closer together, but very similar sound. Now, so if you're a tenor, you could sing all these notes. And then a voice that would be very similar to the contralto, or maybe even higher, closer to an alto, is something called a countertenor. It's a tenor voice that can sing even higher, so they might even go higher than that E5 that I'd played before. And if you have one of those, that's great. You can sing some very, very high music while also singing some lower music. So good job. Now the next voice down is one that most people don't experience until they hit puberty, mostly men, just because our voices don't change until after that time. And it's called the baritone. And a baritone goes from about this note, an A2, to this note, an A4. So, and then sometimes can go a little lower or a little higher. So if you're a baritone, you could go. And then the last voice type is a bass. And that is the lowest voice type that has a category. There are some people who can sing lower than a bass, but they are outliers. They just have very fantastic voices that can go a little lower. So the bass can sing as low as this note, the E2, and can sing as high as this note, usually, E4. So yeah, so you have all these different ranges, and oftentimes these are just generalities. People might fit into two categories, and might fit into one very well. Mr. Marr, for example, I fit in, my lowest note is about an E2, and I can go a little lower, but I'm really stretching my voice at that point. And then I can go as high as an E5. So, to just give you an example. No, 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 no. So if you could hear, when I got up into the last little part of my range, I had to use something called my head voice, which is when I'm not really using a lot of the support that I have in this area that we use when we would be singing normally, but it's a lot of just in here, and I'm controlling it with my vocal cords. And that's something that's very common in men, but women also have to use their head voice a lot of the time too when they get it up into these higher ranges, such as some singers who can get up to the C7, which is about here, which is very high. Very, very high. So what I want you to do now is I have a video just below this. It's a YouTube video where you find your vocal range, and it'll play you a series of notes. And I want you to take out a piece of paper or a tablet or whatnot to just keep track of what your lowest and your highest note are. And then you can share with Mr. Marr what your ranges are and see if they fall kind of in the soprano range, mezzo soprano, alto. You can look up those ranges for yourself. Just look up vocal ranges on Google. You'll find the ranges and see kind of where you fit. You might be in a higher one, a lower one, you might be in two. Yeah, just be really interested. Now, the way the video works, it'll play you a note, and then you'll sing that note, try to match it, and then just keep going until you can't really go anywhere. So when I was going, let's say, start my lower range, no, 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 no. So those last two notes, they weren't matching really well. I was kind of trying to push my voice a little bit. So go until just before that point so that you kind of know where your range is. So mine, the last good note I had was kind of this E2, and then the rest were not very good notes. So that means my range really was only in that area. Okay, so once you get those, you can share them with me on Google Classroom, and I would love to see those, and we can talk about them a bit more next time. Next class, we'll take a closer look at some different voice ranges of popular singers, and I'll share with you some of the different ranges that we have, and you can compare it to what you have. And remember, these don't always stay the same. If you're not practicing your singing a lot, they'll get a little smaller, because like a muscle, you need to work it and help with the flexibility, stretch it out. If you're practicing a lot of singing, your voice range will be a bit wider. So right now, Mr. Marr is kind of in his medium. I'm not practicing a lot of singing, but I sing a lot at school, so I have my range is decent. But there were times when I could go a little higher, a little lower, and a little higher. And that's just how things change over time. And that your voice will be constantly changing a bit. It'll kind of stay in one area a bit more, but it can vary a little bit at the edges. So have some fun with that activity. And yeah, have a great rest of your day, guys. And there's that movement video at the end just to give you some movement break while you're stuck at home. Okay? Have a great day. Bye, guys.